Good morning, everyone. Our first speaker of the morning will be Amber Graner. Amber is currently the User Experience and Community Specialist with Linaro. In 2009, Amber Graner started her journey into open source via Ubuntu by blogging about her experiences. Soon, she became a writer for Linux Pro and Ubuntu User magazines, as well as co-author for the 6th and 7th editions of the official Ubuntu book. Graner is also a reviewer for the 1st and 2nd editions of The Art of Community. While currently working in the Linux on ARM ecosystem, Graner is still an active Ubuntu community member and organizer who encourages everyone around her to participate, support, and learn about Ubuntu and open source. With a smile and a sense of humor, Graner reminds people that there is a place for everyone in both the Linaro and Ubuntu communities, regardless of technical skill levels or lack thereof. She is constantly looking for people, places, and events within the open source communities that help inspire users to participate actively within the community of their choice. And without further ado, here's Amber Graner.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? I usually don't need a mic, but I guess they told me I have to have one for recording purposes, so here I am, mic. So tell me if I'm too loud or you can't hear me. So I've learned a couple things being here already with you all. I learned 10 a.m. is early. I guess I'm showing my age. I thought sleeping in until 8 was like, was sleeping in. I normally get up at 5. But what this talk is really about, I started in open source personally in 2009. I'd been on the peripheral since the early 90s. I was around, I was at Fort Bragg when the Army started looking at ways to get intelligence in the air. Because when those troops, anybody from 18th Airborne Corps, those who don't know, can be anywhere in the world in 18 hours. And when they would go boots up, they had no intel till they had boots on the ground. So to solve that, they started looking at systems to get that intel en route. And they chose early, these very early Zenith 8086 laptops, like first generation with the gray screens and blue letters, or blue letters and gray screens, worst for your eyes ever. And they used Slackware. And I happened to lay on the drop zone in the rain, watching them do this, and it was successful. And I thought, wow, I want to be involved, with Linux. But at the time, when my husband was getting involved in it, there was a stack of discs about like this. Some of you probably never even seen those discs, but they were this high, and I'm like, there's no manual, and there's no, there's nothing that you just have to figure it out with man pages. And I'm like, oh, it kind of stinks. I don't want to do that. I had other things on my mind at the time. And then I learned that, like most people, most people don't have developers sitting in their living rooms. They don't have, a kernel hacker that they can, turn their chair around and say, help me with this. And I didn't want my husband to help me with any of it. None of it. One, we argue too much. So I didn't want him to help me. And so I tried over the years many variations of Linux. And I always went back at the time. First it was a DOS machine, then it was a Windows machine, then it was a Mac machine. Every time he'd walk out the door, something would break, and I would curse him for days and go back to my Mac, or whatever it was at the time. And then in 2009, he started working for Canonical, and he, being my husband, started working for Canonical in 2008. He brought home, from a Sprint, he brought home a CD and a T-shirt. And it said, Linux for Human Beings. And if anybody's read my blog, they know that first blog post, I said, I just got back from my yearly checkup. I'm human. They confirmed it. So I can do this. So he handed me an old Dell Latitude. I think the X key was falling off already, and I don't know, the battery was falling out. Oh, it's just crazy. And so he says, press F12 and go. Within 2 hours, I was up and running. That right there was unheard of 10 years ago for anybody trying to use Linux. You couldn't do it. 2 hours was like, I don't know, 2 hours you just, I don't know, barely got a driver installed or something. But, so I was always afraid. I was always afraid that I would never be able to use it. And then along comes Ubuntu, and I get started. And what I learned was, in these last years, is that anything I wanted to do, nobody gave me permission to do it. I just did it. And that is what I wish I had learned when I was your age. I wish that somebody had told me that don't be afraid to go and conquer anything you want to conquer. And I'm sure somebody planted those seeds, but I didn't listen. I didn't hear it enough. And I think sometimes we forget. As humans, we forget. And fear is one of those things that can paralyze us if we let it. So, a little bit about what I do now. I overheard somebody say, oh, she's going to tell us about Ubuntu. No, I'll relate Ubuntu, and I'm not going to try to convince you to use Ubuntu. What I hope that you'll take away is that don't be afraid to do anything you want to do. Ever. You know, if it's not illegal, and by your moral standards it's not immoral, then do it. You know? Enjoy it. And I never in a million years, when I was in the military and I was an intelligence analyst, I had an instructor that said, you can write summaries all day long, you can have published reports at the national level, but until you're published, your intelligence means nothing. At that moment in my life, I said, I want to be published. Fast forward almost 25 years, and I am published. Who knew that that goal that I had set so long ago would be attained through open source? And I totally fell into it. I started writing a very opinionated blog about my user experience in Ubuntu. And now a good friend of mine who was the associate publisher for Linux Pro magazine. How many of you guys have seen Linux Pro magazine? Ubuntu User magazine? How many of you guys are familiar with, and gals, how many of you all are familiar with or have anything to do with open source at all? Like, oh, wow, great. I just wanted to find out where I needed to explain stuff at. And so I didn't know then that I would be asked to write a blog on the Ubuntu user site, that I would eventually be writing and doing the interviews in Ubuntu user, that I would be writing for the Linux Pro on their site, and eventually become one of the co-authors for the official Ubuntu book. I had no idea that that's the route that I would take to become published, something that I wanted to do all those years ago. I thought it would be intelligence and working with some country's weapons system or something like that. I had no idea. At the time, I wanted to be published in Jane magazine, weapons systems, and tell people about that. But it didn't happen that way because I was afraid to figure out how to do it. Something said, no, you can't do that. Because in the military, I was in the military pre-tailhook. So it was tough for women in the military. Almost not as tough as it is for women in technology, computer sciences. We're still a small group, very small group. Probably less than 2% in some areas. So it's a difficult path sometimes. And so somehow I got it in my mind that, I couldn't do that. And it changed when I started using Ubuntu. And it changed because of open source. It changed because of the philosophies and principles involved with open source. So here's what I thought about. And this next slide isn't the best slide in the world, but I like it. Oops. So how many of you guys are familiar with Wally Coyote and Homes and Antics? He tries to steal all the sheep. He wants them all. Well, that's how I felt when I got ready to look at Ubuntu and the free and open source software communities. I wanted to do everything. And somebody said, well, you can't do that. I'm like, yes, I can. And then the more somebody said, no, I couldn't, the more I wanted to do it. And there's a danger in that. There's a danger in trying to collect all the sheep and carry them out. Burnout is really... I gave a talk 2 years ago, and it was called Volunteer Vertigo and High-Tech Hangovers. I was doing way too much. So later in the talk, I'm going to show you what I did my very first year, and I would encourage you not to follow my path. Just pick one avenue of it and don't do exactly what I did. But that's how I felt about all of this new and exciting stuff that I was learning. I wanted it all. I wanted to take it all in at one time. And we can do anything we want to do. We can have it all. We just can't have it all at once. You can try. I don't know anybody that's succeeded in doing that, but you have to sort of take it in steps, I guess. So I looked at this big picture, and I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to get there. And at some levels, I was really afraid because it's a developer-centric environment, and I am not a developer. I don't write code, nor do I play a developer on the internet. I leave that to people who actually know what they're doing. But I had a good time figuring it out and learning what I needed to learn in regards to what they did. So first it started with a conversation. I had a conversation with somebody saying, I want to do this. And then it was joining the community. The first thing I did when I was got involved with Ubuntu is I joined the Ubuntu Women mailing list. Then I joined the IRC channel. Your guys are probably going to laugh because I said, IRC? Man, that's someplace I don't want to go. I always heard it was illicit conversations and stuff. That was where the porn was at or whatever. But I'm like, IRC. So, but I learned how to play nice in the sandbox and what the rules around IRC were, and don't say, hey, can you help me? Or, hey, I got a question. Just ask a question. So I learned all these protocols the hard way. I got flamed a few times, but, and then I was commenting on things. I was talking about my experience. I wasn't filing bugs yet, but I was talking about my experience with what I was doing through my blog. I would say, this sucks, or this is really great. I understand what it is. It's intuitive. It's whatever. But I would give feedback. And so I was commenting on things around me just through my blog, just everyday experiences. Then I started getting involved with more than just the Ubuntu Women group. I started getting involved with the news team, the Loco teams, started organizing events, all these different things. So I started this collaboration effort. Because if I tried to do everything all by myself, I'd still be by myself sitting there wondering why I wasn't going anywhere. If you try to just not collaborate with people, not talk to people, there's a saying that, release early, release often. Get your stuff out there. It doesn't matter how buggy it is. The first release of Ubuntu, it was called Warty Warthog for a reason. It had its issues. But they put it out there for a reason. Get feedback, get collaboration, get bugs filed, do all that stuff. I used to think that I was being a nuisance when I'd file a bug. They're going to hate me again. And I had this one developer, Ken Van Dyne, with Canonical, and he worked on Gwibber. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Gwibber, but it, kind of a social media management tool. And the first time I met him was at a release party. And he asked me, I didn't know who he was. It's the value of asking, what do you do before you comment? He asked me, what do you think about Gwibber? And I said, I hate it. I uninstalled it. And he went, hi, I'm blah, 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 and I work on Gwibber. And I was like, okay, how do I take my foot out of my mouth now? Catch up, please. And he said, can you do me a favor? Throughout this next release, can you reinstall it, and every time you encounter anything painful, not the way you think it would be, can you tell me? File a bug and tell me personally. He was excited about people giving him feedback. He was excited about people telling him what didn't work and what did work, and it was a whole different experience. So I suddenly said, yay, you know what? They like it when I complain. I got to do this more often. That wasn't quite what they meant, but that's how I took it. And so then I started real contribution. Then got to the part where I made a difference, and everybody who around me were making differences. And sometimes, as a woman, I think sometimes, and sometimes you guys can probably relate to this too, we tend to take the humble approach. No, it's nothing. No, it's okay. No, whatever. We take that humble approach. You know what? Don't be humble. Get out there and go, yeah, I did that. Damn it. It's mine. And so, not in that like obnoxious kind of way, but own it. Own what you do. Own your successes. Own your failures. So, those 5 C's are really important. But even more important are some of the fears that you face when you get involved. How many of you guys, I know you raised your hand, but how many of you guys are involved, or gals? I say guys, and I don't mean anything by that. It's a bad habit that I have. I should say y'all. So how many of y'all are involved with any kind of open source project outside of work or outside of your academics? Like you do it for fun. So you have skin in the game, and it means something to you. So those of you who raised your hand, anybody can comment. Why do you do it? Why do you like being involved?
Help other people.
Help other people. So you get your motivational paycheck by people's gratitude, by when they say thank you, and they can see the difference that you're making, and you can see where they're grateful for what you've contributed, right? So that's a motivational paycheck. A lot of times, people say, why do you get involved? Why do you give up your time? A lot of times, especially open source projects, can't write that paycheck to keep the lights on. They can't give me a check for me to buy new shoes. What they can do is write me a motivational paycheck that keeps me going. And that's through any number of ways. Whether you see your name, on the commit list, or you see in the release notes your name's there for what you've done, or you help publish a newsletter and you're there as a contributor, or whatever it happens to be, you get your motivational paycheck some way. Know what that is, so you know how you can get, like, people can get you interested, and how you can get other people, because if you know what motivates you, you can then find out what motivates other people. For me, I wanted to be a geek. I totally wanted to be a geek. It was all about the geek cred. And I wanted to use something that was free and open. So one of the fears that I faced was I thought, wrongly, that all life was about you follow step 1, you follow step 2, you follow step 3, you insert tab A into slot B, and it goes on. That's not how the open source community works. Now, there are parts of it that do work that way. If you'll notice, I have a lattice design, and that's how most things in life are. You pick a point you want to start. So some people, like me, I'm not green at place. Like I said, I want to just get involved. And then I'm like, ooh, something's shiny. I want to go do this. Something else that was shiny. Let me go do this for a while. And then I moved all over the community. Some people say, I want to start here and I want to go here. And they're just they are step 1, step 2. But in between those points on the lattice, you may have steps 1, 2, 3. You may want to be a developer. Maybe you want to be a Motu. Maybe you want to be a core dev or something like that. Then there are steps that you have to do. But for the most part, you pick what you want to, where you want to start, and you just go for it. Nobody says you have to, take steps 1, 2. Make them out of order. Rearrange them. Make them work for you. Don't take for granted just because somebody says, well, we've always done it this way. Why? Get somebody to tell you why. Trust but verify. Somebody tells me something, I listen. All right, let me go check it out. Let me go look at it. I do trust people, but I want to verify what they're telling me. So, but do that. Just because some way has always been, done that way, if it doesn't make sense and you think you have a better way, do it. You might get pushback. You might stand alone. You might get challenged. I got challenged so many times it wasn't funny. I got flamed on mailing lists for having attachments on there because I thought attachments were cool. Why? I'm the leader and I say so. That won't fly. Don't ever try that. I should show you the list. It got kind of ugly. But it's that lattice approach, though. And, you get to pick your points and you get to change your mind and you get to go your own way. I had to leave my comfort zone. It was my little comfort zone. But once I stepped outside of it, that's when all the cool stuff started happening for me. Once I said, you know what? I'm going to face my fear. I'm not going to be afraid if somebody doesn't like me. I'm not going to be afraid if I make a grammatical error in an email or if I say something really goofy that gets quoted, somewhere on IRC. I think somebody asked me one time where I went to school, and I said North Carolina, and they made some other snarky comment, and I said, hey, I can read numbers too. And they're like, quote, somebody else, said that. And I'm like, and I said somewhere where, as human beings, we're destined to be confused. Something about unity, somebody was confused. And I said, we're just destined to be confused. That's by human nature. But I didn't care anymore. And it's not that I didn't care what I said. I have a filter. I tend to try to be appropriate when necessary. But once I stepped out of my comfort zone, and I was telling somebody my comfort zone was not a circle. It was not circular. My comfort zone was a very narrow box. It had corners. It had corners where I got trapped in misconceptions and preconceived ideas and couldas and shouldas and wouldas and all that stuff. But once I changed where I stood, I no longer stood with somewhere that had corners and boundaries and limits. I changed my perception of then standing in a circle. And when you stand in a circle, you don't have those corners. You're open to things, and circles can encompass other circles and build out. It's like a ripple effect, and it keeps going. So if you're in this narrow frame, you have this tunnel vision, you're boxed in, forget the box. Step outside of it and go to where the magic happens and enjoy it. And I started writing, and I like, people would correct grammatical mistakes publicly. I'm like, all right, I'm a redneck, and I'll redneck anything in 5 minutes or less. Leave me alone. So, that was my way. It was humor. But inside, I was afraid. I was afraid of what people's comments were, and I had to overcome that. And you have to overcome your fears by stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping into that area that you want to be. Like yesterday, in the first talk yesterday, make those goals a self-fulfilling prophecy. I said, I want to be published. And I kept it in the back of my mind. But when I got involved in open source, it became a it moved to the forefront. And I made the comment, that's what I want to do. And I was able to do that. Not because I'm, all that in a bag of chips or whatever. It just happened to be that I stepped outside my comfort zone. So don't be afraid to move beyond whatever you're afraid of. What's the worst thing that can happen online? Somebody, types in all caps to you. They can't reach the computer and hurt you. So you kind of just do what you have to do. So when you're talking about successes, look at all the things that go through people's minds. There's obstacles, and you think you get hard work, and you make mistakes, and you have dreams, and it's painful, and you're enthusiastic. I had somebody tell me, you're like this open source zealot. It's like you just keep going. And I'm like, I could tie anything back to open source if you give me it long enough. I'll have some metaphor that has to deal with open source. And people were like, really? Especially people who have to do it every day. 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 16 hours a day, depending on what they're working on. If they were working on Ubuntu that long, they didn't want me to come in and tell them all the exciting things that I was excited about. They're like, can you just be quiet for just 5 minutes? Especially in my house, because my husband is one of the developers. He was the kernel team manager for a while, and he just really didn't want to hear all my enthusiasm for 3 years, how enthusiastic I was about everything. But what I learned in the community, that the key to my success was not me. In Ubuntu, we have, we say we stand on the shoulders of giants. Stefano's here with Debian. We often say we stand on their shoulders, and we do. But I stood on the shoulders of my teammates. So it was teamwork, and it was the mentoring they gave me. And other people's stories inspired me, and I had this vision of what I thought the community should be, or what I thought community should be. Every time I learned something, I would teach. All the stuff that I learned, the leadership things that I'd learned throughout the years, I tried to be that example. And I got to lead some really cool projects and lead some cool initiatives. That was really, it was good. People motivated me. I wanted to motivate other people. I coached people through different things. And so just like people did for me, I did for them. And they, sorry about that. So they did that for me. But you have all these things that comes to success. Success is not just a word. It takes a life of its own. It has legs of its own that help you create your successes. And so if you want to be successful, you can be successful. Don't take the word can't out of your vocabulary. Take the word impossible out of your vocabulary. I like something Audrey Hepburn said about impossible. She said the word itself says, I'm possible. Think about that, impossible. I'm possible, you're possible. So take those negative things out of your vocabulary and just be part of something greater than yourself, and you'll make it. I know there was a time I didn't realize. I got introduced to Nathan via IRC in the news team, I believe. I think it was on the news team, or some council that he was on. He was like the stellar, amazing community contributor in the Ubuntu world. And so a year goes by, and we have this discussion one day, and I finally said to somebody, how old is he? Now I think he's really young. I didn't know how old he was, and I think at the time he was still in high school, and I'm like, oh, wow, I have kids his age. And so it made me really appreciate the fact that anybody at any age, at any time, can get involved with open source. But not just open source. You can get involved in anything at any age. Life, don't sit by and let it, it's not a spectator sport. Don't stand on the sidelines. Whatever you're passionate about, figure out how to be part of it. Even if it's just talking to people, going to an event like this and finding out how you can get involved, any of that stuff, just jump in the water. Like my first big Linux event was OzCon. How many of you guys have heard of O'Reilly's open source conference? Like 5,000 people. It's like the Olympic swimming pool of like conferences. I didn't go stick my feet in like the wading pool. I jumped off the high dive, and I would go talk to people, and they would say, "You don't know who I am?" I'm like, "No, I don't know who you are." "Do you know who I am?" I'm like, "No, I don't know." "Oh, good. Hi." It was quite humbling, but it was good for me, and it was good for them, and we all had a really fun time. But I learned too from I asked them, how did you get started? So I started really interviewing people about their experiences and how they got started, and that was really cool as well. The other cool thing I learned, other than being open and transparent and collaborative and communicating openly, all those things that people worry about, it really gelled with me. I have a lot of friends over on the Red Hat side of the fence, and they're really great folks, and they wrote this document called The Open Source Way, this book. And it came out about the same time John O. Bacon, the Ubuntu community manager, was writing Art of Community. And one of the lines in The Open Source Way says, embrace failure. Fail spectacularly, but take notes. You know? Look at failure completely different. I used to think, oh, if I fail, that was my fear. What if I failed? What if you fail? I think it was Edison who, on the 100th time created this successful, created a light bulb. Somebody said, did you fail 99 times? He went, no. I found 99 ways not to create a light bulb. So look at failure totally different. Don't be afraid of it. I often tell people when I have the opportunity to fail spectacularly, like very publicly and very open, and I know I'm in the right place. And if I do that, I've tried something and it just didn't work. Next time I try something, I get more people, I get more feedback, and I try it, and it's not an epic fail. And you know what? It's not an epic fail when you fail either. It's a way to learn and grow. So, I tell my kids, sometimes you don't fail, you just had a error in your judgment. I don't like the word failure, honestly, but, we use it in our language. But when I see that, one of these days it's going to be, my name with epic fail on it or something, and I'm going to be like, yeah, I tried that. And it's just how you look at it. Don't be afraid to do that. There were times I was in discussions with people, and I was the Lone Ranger, and you know what? A year and a half later or so, we did it my way. So it was just planting seeds and doing that kind of stuff. And sometimes you stand alone. But don't be afraid of that. Enjoy it. Enjoy the solitude while you have it. So these are probably the three biggest influencers of me when I was learning about community and open source. So John O., our community manager in Ubuntu, wrote Art of Community. I got a chance to review that. In the book, he writes about a conversation he and I had about 3 years ago. And that conversation, I pulled him aside at a UDS, and in there he talks about he braced for impact. I didn't know I was a force of nature, but he said, anybody who knows me, when I say, can we have a private conversation? He was like, oh, God, what's she going to say to me? But we learn from each other. He learned that in these sessions as the week went on at UDS, at the Ubuntu Developer Summit, he wasn't as receptive to hearing the community. He would treat the community like he treated his peers at Canonical. And the community doesn't work for Canonical. The community doesn't, answer to Canonical. The community is the community. It is its own mind and own voice. It has its own direction. It's like water. It seeks its own level. And so he was realizing that, and people were sort of, people were getting a little put off by the way he was acting. And he wasn't rude. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a difference in the way he was on Monday than the way he was Thursday afternoon. And so I was like, I got to tell you this. And it was a good conversation. It was the very first conversation that he and I ever had about management styles and conversation styles and stuff. Since then, we've gone on to have many, and I hope that he's still not bracing for impact when I say, hey, you need to call me. So the open source way is really cool, too. And you'll notice it still says edition 1. There's many areas of this document that are incomplete and need fixing. So if you're involved in the Red Hat community, if you like Fedora, if you like all that good stuff, and it is good stuff in there, Karsten Wade, who he calls himself a community gardener. He's a great guy, lives out in California, does stuff for Red Hat there, and he contributed a lot to this document. And you can add to this. You can send them comments. You can make comments on that. But they have a lot about that open transparency, collaborative stuff, how to communicate openly, how to be involved on a mailing list, IRC. Jono does that too. We do that too in the Ubuntu book. We have a whole chapter on community and getting involved in community and the resources of community and what that really means. So those 3 books really helped me a lot in understanding and evolving my perception of community and being involved in community. So check them out if you get a chance. And I have to be, in full disclosure, I'm one of the authors on the official Ubuntu book, but it's all right. You can buy it. So let's look at. So this is going to outline that first year. My very first year in 2009. This, you'll see, all the areas of Ubuntu I got involved with. So I joined the Ubuntu Women project. And the cool thing about the Ubuntu Women project is I had to overcome some self-esteem issues. And some of the women in this channel, we have two channels. We have one that's not logged and private. Well, not private, anybody can join, but it's not logged. And we have another one that's logged. Because there's some discussions that, you pull people aside in the hallway and you really don't want anybody recording, those conversations. And that's like a hallway track. And these women were talking about things negative things. Anything that was negative and getting advice on it and that kind of stuff. And in 2009, it was a really turning point for women in the open source community. Geek feminism stood up. We had to separate out some issues in the Ubuntu Women channel. It was really cool. Between 2009 and 2010, it was a really volatile time, and some really cool things came out of it. And so I said to this group about midway through 2009, I don't want to be involved with a group of angry women. That went over real well. I kind of got schooled a little bit. But I didn't worry about what I said. I didn't worry about how I said it. I just said it. And then I learned that things I'd overcome being in the military, things I'd overcome being in the corporate world, things that the stereotypes when you go from working to being a stay-at-home mom and then going back into the working world, all these criticisms and feedback that people want to give you. Yeah, we'll use feedback. That's a good word. But they were openly talking about these things that I didn't have the privilege of learning. When I was in school, they didn't have gender equality classes. We didn't have feminism classes. We didn't have any of that kind of stuff that gave you labels or fancy labels for behaviors and stuff. And I really didn't care about the labels and kind of said that. I've learned to sort of appreciate some of that and kind of understand it now and what that means to get more people involved, both men and women. Because if you open it up to women, you're also opening it up to everyone else. You make it more friendly to bring in women, you're going to bring in other people too. Not because of the women, but because you're more exclusive in your attitude. So I learned a lot about that and how to deal with that, because I realized that some of the behaviors that these women were complaining about I was guilty of. I was just as guilty as everybody else, because when I was in the military, that survival instinct kicked in. And I learned more about male bonding than probably most guys do at that time. And I learned how to be just as rowdy and just as gutterish and everything else as they were. And I often would throw that humor right back. It was so wrong of me, and I learned that. I trolled people. I trolled people just like, don't feed the trolls. I was a troll. I would troll people. And I didn't even realize I was doing it until I became involved with that group. And since I've apologized to many people and changed my behavior. But other thing I did, we stood up the North Carolina Loco team, and we got approved. I went to UDS for the first time. Started interviewing women for the Ubuntu Women series. Got involved with the news team, U.S. teams. Playing UbuCons, the leadership series. I went for Ubuntu membership 6 months after I joined the community. Luckily, I got it. I don't know if that would have set me back a little if I hadn't. But that was just the Ubuntu stuff in 2009. At the same time, I also got involved in all these Linux fests. So I went to Southeast Linux Fest and ran some BOF sessions. I went to Community Leadership Summit and ran sessions. Went to OSCON and worked a couple booths and did a talk there. Not at OSCON, but another BOF session. And then Atlanta Linux Fest, Atlanta Linux Fest doesn't happen anymore, but it's probably one of my really cool achievements that I look back at. We had about 1,500 people show up to that event. And we pulled that event off with a $2,000 budget. And we fed everybody. And we had speakers. And so it was an amazing time. And it was fun. And we had a good time. And then I went to Ohio and gave some talks and ran some UbuCons there. So while I was busy doing all that stuff in Ubuntu, I was also doing all that stuff on the Linux Fest side of things. As if that wasn't enough, because I was a glutton for punishment, I guess, I decided I would write some more. In addition to my blog, I was writing a U and Ubuntu blog on the Ubuntu user site. I was helping fossevents.org get stood up. I was doing book reviews in my personal blog, and I was writing for Ubuntu User magazine. All this other stuff was going on. I was collecting the sheep. I was finding it. And then I did even more interviews. I was writing Behind the Fest, where I would interview all these organizers for Linux conferences. I did video interviews at all the UDSs since the Dallas one, way back when. I mentioned it earlier because it was a part of Ubuntu, the Ubuntu Women series. Meet the Platform team, where I interviewed all the developers at Canonical who were having to be on the Platform team. Then I think it's called Ubuntu Engineering now. It's no longer called Platform. I did People, Personalities, and Planners, where I did even more interviews, about people who planned events and stuff. So that was my very first year being involved in a community. Yeah, I was overcompensating, I guess. But what if somebody had said, you can't do that? What if somebody said, you're not a developer, you can't review our book? What if somebody had said, you can't go to UDS, you don't write code? And I was sponsored, too, to UDS. So my first year involved in the community, Canonical sponsored me later. The first time I asked, they said no. That was like 4 months into my contribution. But 9 months into it, I got to go. And the point somebody asked me was, well, your husband's a developer for Canonical. If anything, he was my biggest obstacle. He really was, because he didn't talk about the stuff that I did. He wouldn't help me with anything, because he said, nobody has a developer sitting in their living room. You have to do this on your own. You have to do this just like any other community member coming to the community would have to do it. And oftentimes, I would just ask a simple question. He was like, no. And he would send me. So he would not help me. For 3 years, he would not help me at all. There comes a point when he was going to help me. But it didn't happen for 3 years. And so, but the cool thing was I stood on my own. And I stood on my own merits. And so, in the open source, the other thing we have is meritocracy. And that is akin to duology. You do. You don't sit back and theorize. Or you have to think, and you have to plan, you have to design. But eventually, you got to get your hands dirty. You got to get in there, in the mix, and put some skin in the game. And if you don't have skin in the game, nobody's going to give you the time of day. Show them that it's important to you, and they will turn around, and you will become important to them. So if there's any project, don't just sit back and say, hey, I'm new. How come you're not paying attention to me? That's like a 2-year-old doing this, Nobody wants that. What they want to see is that you're interested, and you're just as dedicated to it as they are. And once they see that, they're going to help. They're going to bend over backwards to help you. But if you're just going to sit there and go, I can't do it, nobody's going to help you. And I can't say that I blame anyone. At first, I thought, I'm new and nobody's being nice to me. And now I'm thinking, on my bucket list is I want to get something, I want a patch on one patch in my lifetime submitted to the Linux kernel. That is going to be a rite of passage. And that is a rite of passage I'm actually looking forward to. And so you have to really engage that community that you're getting involved with. If you want to be in the kernel community, dive in. Don't be afraid that somebody's going to yell at you. They might. Who cares? Just do what you want to do. You want to be involved in the Fedora community? Jump in. Some great people there. They're as you do things and as you build merit and you become more trusted, they're going to trust you. I remember one time a well-known kernel developer, upstream kernel developer. My husband was at an event, and I was using a Mac at the time, MacBook Pro, 17-inch. It didn't have like the little thing you could put the paper clip in or whatever to get the DVD out if it gets stuck. So I had to call him. He was in Germany somewhere, and I said, how do I get the DVD out? Well, he's sitting around with all these upstream kernel developers, and one very well-known one said, oh, tell her it's this key combination. I said, who is that? can I trust them? And I didn't know this person at the time. I met this person later and was very embarrassed that I ever asked them, are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you going to break my computer? Now, knowing what I know now, if that person had broke my computer, I'd probably held on to it and said, guess who broke my computer? I would have loved it. But so it's just a matter of perspective, and it's just a matter of building, getting involved and getting your hands dirty and I say dirty, but really just taking ownership of what you want to do. Don't let somebody else tell you, what you want to do is observe when you go into a community, see how it works, and don't go against the grain for the sake of going against the grain, but see how it all works and see where you fit in, and then just jump in and do your thing. Don't be afraid that you don't know. Believe me, I tease people and say, you know what, Linux fixed this bug I've had for years. And I said, what is that? And I'm like, that whole command line, they just fixed it. So I don't ever have to use it. But no, I do use it now. I jokingly say that. But it's just really cool, whatever your perspective is. I didn't know. Back then, I work now at a company, nonprofit. It's called Linaro, and it's Linux on ARM. It's an embedded area, and here we are doing these, enabling ARM chips so SOCs can get them to market faster, and working with, some of our members and partners and getting that out there. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known an ARM chip from my shoulder. I wouldn't have. I saw an ARM chip. I saw one, or ARM board, and I thought, who cut a motherboard up and stuck it in an acrylic case? Now it's like, that's that board, that's that board, that's that. We aren't born with this knowledge. We all have to learn it. Nobody comes down and puts their hands on you and says, I'm going to transfer all this knowledge. You've got to go find that knowledge. You're sitting in a place now that I wasn't. You're actually sitting in school and you're being taught this stuff. And it's great. But go and get practical. Scratch your own itch. Go figure out what problem you can solve and go solve that and then own it. Like, that's yours. You've got it. My problem that I wanted to solve was, while communities like Ubuntu and even Fedora and other communities said, we value our end users, I didn't see anybody going, I'm an end user, hear me roar. So I'm like, I'm an end user, I'm going to roar. And make it be known that end users are just as important as the developers. Gone are those days where it was by the techie for the techie. It might be by the techie, influenced by the non-developer, but for everybody, Well, you don't want to have a fear. Cross it off your list. Get rid of it. And do what you want to do. And don't let anybody try to, sway you from what you want to do. Figure out what you want your destiny to be and set yourselves that way and go. Now, I'm not saying that you can't change your mind. I had these grandiose ideas. I was going to be a NASCAR driver when I was 9 years old. I still haven't gotten into NASCAR, but guess what? 2013, I will get behind the wheel of a NASCAR. That Richard Petty driving experience. I will be there. Because that's what I want to do. So I'm not afraid to get out there and do things anymore and live without fear. I also tell people, if you're afraid of making a decision, you will always fear the decisions you make. You will always second guess yourself, and you will always wonder, was that right, was that wrong? Make a decision and just keep going. You can always go back and change your course. You can, draw fire elsewhere and go forward. So we have a few more minutes, and with that, I will say thank you. Thank you, Nathan, for inviting me. Thank you for coming to this talk. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can. I'm on Freenode. There's my Twitter. You can find me there, too. I'm like social media junkie, I guess. But yeah, so are there any questions? No? Yes?
You were talking about the difficulties of personalities in open source communities. Have you found other ways to possibly diffuse, tensions and egos other than owning up and just doing more work and better work than they do?
Oh, humor. But let me tell you, there's issues with humor. There's issues with humor. Comedians make it look very easy. But when you try to just ad-lib off the cuff kind of humor, it often comes out wrong and it's wholly inappropriate. I've done that a couple times. But so for me, I always kind of play up, my southern roots, and I've been known to say, bless your heart. let them interpret that any way they can. But the other thing I've often done too is I've also said privately to that person, publicly I would say, let me think about what you just said. I don't know that I agree with you 100%, but let me think about it. I hear what you're telling me. And then I would email them privately and say, hey, can we have a talk? And that's when I guess that's where that brace for impact would come, because I'd be like, that was really rude, and why did you do that? And, other people were watching. I can take it, but, what about the people who are new? And, they're watching you, and now they're afraid to even say anything. And then we would come back to a public channel and work it out. But I didn't take on more work, nor did I do what they had me do. Sometimes you just have to stand your ground. And, so I've been wrong, and I have been wrong very publicly and had to apologize very publicly, too, on my blog. And that's okay. I'll own my mistakes, and I'll tell people I'm sorry when I can. But a lot of times it's just humor. And sometimes if you know people well enough, you can say, dude, are you having a bad day? Really? Did you, not have your coffee this morning? Or whatever. But humor sometimes works quite well. But you got to know the people to sort of do that. Or sometimes it's give it a day or two and then come back to it. But there are some very strong opinionated personalities, and it would be really weird if, it would be very boring if there weren't those personalities. Anything else? Anything? You don't have to ask me about this. If there's any other questions you want to ask about Linaro or Ubuntu or anything. Yes?
Think of the user interface changes that you wanted to make.
You know what? At first, I did not like it. And I told a couple people that. Now, I would not go back to not having Unity for love or money. I am so used to it, and I love it, And I was at a bookstore, how long ago? 6 months, maybe? And I noticed some people looking at the official Ubuntu book, and of course I had to go over. had to go over. But what I noticed was the two boys. There was one who was still in high school, one who was in college. The kid that was in college didn't like it. Thought they were oversimplifying it. Thought, they were, dumbing down Linux. The 14-year-old loved it. The dad was sitting there going, which kid do I listen to? So I'm like, don't listen to one of them. Let me tell you. But it's just perspective. I think it's what you get used to. And change is never fun. Change is often difficult. I remember there was, when Ubuntu had the animals on their, on the background. And then along came Jaunty Jackalope, and they took my jackalope away. The comment was, where's my jackalope? And for a long time, the managers had that in their manager channel, like, where's my jackalope? Because I made such a stink about the fact that it went away. Well, at the time, one of the lead developers said, why in the world would you think there should be an animal? I'm like, well, there has been. And they're like, no, Amber, before that, there wasn't. I said, that was before my time. Since my time, there's always been animals on my desktop, and I want them. So I just, it's just whatever you get used to. It's from your perspective and what you're used to. And if you don't like it, the bad thing, you can change it. You can change your desktop any way you want to, or you can install something else or whatever. And that's probably very sort of cavalier about it. But there's so many options out there. If you don't like something, don't stay with it if it's painful. Go find what's not painful for you and do that. But I happen to like it. I wouldn't know what to do without it. So, but that's me, and I'm probably in a classification all into myself. But yeah, I like it. So, anything else? Anything about? Yes.
So in some open source communities, they're very developer-centric, and if you don't code, you don't count.
Yes.
So as somebody who doesn't code, how do you manage to make an impact?
So in my job at Linaro as the community specialist or architect and catalyst, I'm not real sure how that title came about. But in the ARM community, it is very developer-centric. I work with 250 engineers. And they all write some serious code. But how I overcome that and how I make an impact is I say, I want a board. I want each of our boards. And I get those boards. And then I learn how to QA our builds. I don't write a single line of code. All I have to do is figure out how to install it on that ARM board. and then follow their instructions. And then you learn every time you do that. So if you're not a developer, and here's the distinction. I used to have this talk called Into Open Source, and Into was NTEU, non-technical end user. I've since retired that term. It's non-developer, because everybody, no matter if you just installed an operating system yesterday or you've been doing it 10 years, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't know as much as you, and there's always going to be somebody that knows more than you. So you do have technical abilities. You just might not have, I don't have the technical abilities my husband does. Just because I don't write code doesn't mean I can't make an impact. And if I can figure out how to do whatever and I pass that information along, I've just brought in a whole new set of eyes and a whole new set of people that don't have the preconceived ideas that developers have. As a developer, you know what you expect your code to do. As an end user, I have no idea what you want your code to do until I try to do it. And it makes a huge impact because I was testing a couple of our builds, and I'm like, this isn't working. There's bugs. And our Android tech lead said, Amber, I don't have these problems. So I sat down with him. He went, oh, I left out a couple steps. Oh, you are getting that error. I haven't seen that error. And had I went, oh, okay, and just took his word for it and just moved away, they would have never realized they left out steps and they knew in their head what to do. I don't know what to do. So it's those type of things where non-developers can have the biggest impact. Go test something. Go break it. Go tell them what you did. Write about your experience. Tell other people about your experience. Really share and collaborate and see who else you can get. Because you might not be the one actually writing the code, but what if you have a connection to somebody else that can help make their code better? So don't be afraid to talk about it. Even if you think, I'm the only one in the world having this problem, and they're telling me I shouldn't be having this problem. It's only 5 lines of code that, I have to worry about, or 5 commands I have to worry about. Oh, really, it's 7 or 8 commands, and I left them out. That's how I found that I can do it, and that's how I tell other people to do it as well, is just start testing something, break something, try it out. So did I answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Nothing? Yes.
A quick question: what would be, do you think, that the first biggest step in order to be involved with this thing?
The biggest step?
Yeah.
It's deciding you want to be involved. It's deciding you want to be involved, and then just telling somebody, "Hey, I'm here. I've read your documentation." You find where. I use it often. I don't mean to overuse it, but it's like water. You go find, your level. You go find the people that you can talk to, or you send an email to a mailing list, or you join an IRC channel, or you find the contact form on their website. A lot of people do that, especially in the ARM community. They don't necessarily want to ask on a public mailing list. They don't, because they're like, I've been in this community for 10 years, but I've never done anything on ARM, and they don't want to have their peers see that. They're asking about this technology, but you're not born, nobody's born with this. And so if you want to ask anonymously, you find a way to ask anonymously. But all open source projects have some things in common. Mailing lists, IRC channels. There's usually a blog somewhere. There's usually a community link somewhere. There's a community manager somewhere. If not, there's a marketing person somewhere. There's an architect somewhere. Find the community link. All open source projects have a community link. I have yet to see one that maybe they haven't put it on their website, but they have a community and they're well aware of community. Find the community area, and that's where you go. So that's that's what I would tell anybody. Find whoever the community contact is and go bug the heck out of them. That's what I did. Didn't work too well, but it did. It worked great. So anything else? And I got to say, this is one of the other conferences that I've seen a lot of women at, so go you guys and gals. Y'all. So anything else before I run away?
What was the end of this, the social network? What was the end of that story? Did you end up writing up bugs for the guy and now it's an awesome application?
No, I don't use it anymore. But, no, I don't. But it was a great experience, and it was a great experiment that, there was other things for it. And that's why I said, don't be afraid to change your mind. I tried it, and I gave it an honest and fair shake. It just wasn't for me. Other people it was for. And then other third parties, like when you're dealing with, the Facebooks and and the Identicas and the what else? The Twitter, all that. If they change their APIs and don't let you in on the cool secret sauce of what they're changing it to, you can't make your social media management tool talk to it. And so that was happening a little bit too, and it just didn't. It just, you know, things outside the control of those developers, it didn't pan out the way it was supposed to. So, but you know, it was good while it lasted. So, anything else? No? Yes? Maybe? If not, thank you.